The planet Eos 9 was not what anyone would call remarkable. It sat quietly at the edge of a distant solar system, far from Earth, and even farther from the bustling trade routes that connected humanity's greatest colonies. To most people back on Earth, it wasn't worth thinking about. The colony there had been established decades ago as an experiment, a test to see if humans could grow food in conditions so harsh they made survival seem like a miracle. But over time, the project lost funding, attention, and importance. Now, Eos 9 was little more than a footnote in humanity's expansion into space. Yet for the 273 men, women, and children living there, Eos 9 was everything. They called it home. Life on the planet was hard but simple. Days were spent tending crops inside massive domes designed to shield them from the toxic atmosphere outside. Nights were quiet, filled with the hum of machinery keeping the air breathable and the temperature stable. There were no luxuries here, no grand buildings or advanced technology. Everything was old, patched together, or repurposed. But despite its flaws, the colony worked. It survived. At the center of this fragile existence was Daniel Hayes. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and hands calloused from years of fixing things that should have broken long ago. Daniel wasn't born on Eos 9. He'd come here 15 years earlier after his wife passed away. Back then, he thought the isolation might help him heal. Instead, he found purpose. As the colony's lead engineer, Daniel kept the lights on, the water running and the life support systems functioning. Without him, nothing would work. Everyone knew it, though Daniel never liked to talk about it. He preferred action to words, always moving from one task to the next, solving problems before they became disasters. Clara Bennett, on the other hand, was all about words. She was younger than Daniel by at least 20 years, with curly brown hair that she often tied back when working in the fields. Clara had grown up on Eos 9, the daughter of one of the original scientists who helped establish the colony. Her dream was to make discoveries that would change the way humanity fed itself. Not just on Eos 9, but everywhere. She spent her days experimenting with genetically modified plants, trying to create crops that could thrive in even the harshest environments. Some people teased her for being too ambitious, but Clara didn't care. She believed in what she was doing, and that belief gave her strength. Daniel and Clara weren't close friends, but they respected each other. They shared a common goal, keeping the colony alive. That bond was tested every day, especially now, when resources were stretched, thin and morale was low. Supplies from Earth arrived less frequently these days, and when they did, they were meager. The colonists had learned to rely on themselves, but self-reliance only went so far. Equipment broke down faster than it could be repaired. Food rations grew smaller. People whispered about whether Earth had forgotten them entirely. One evening, Daniel sat alone in the control room, staring at the blinking lights of the colony's aging communication array. It was late and everyone else had gone to bed. The silence was comforting, a rare moment of peace in an otherwise chaotic existence. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he monitored incoming signals. Most nights, there was nothing, just static and the occasional automated message from passing freighters. Tonight, however, something caught his eye. A faint transmission flickered across the screen, barely audible beneath layers of interference. At first, Daniel thought it was another routine update from Earth Command, but as he adjusted the frequency, he realized it was different. The voice speaking was human, but it wasn't calm. It was urgent. Warning. Krylith activity detected in Sector Gamma 7. The voice crackled. Heading toward uncharted territories, all outposts advised to prepare defenses. Daniel froze. The Krylith. Even in the remoteness of Eos 9, everyone knew the name. They were an alien species notorious for their ruthlessness. Wherever they went, destruction followed. Entire colonies had vanished without a trace after encountering them. Earth's military forces avoided direct conflict whenever possible, preferring to focus on defending larger, more valuable settlements. Small outposts like Eos 9, they were considered expendable. For a moment, Daniel felt the weight of the situation press down on him. He wanted to dismiss the warning as irrelevant. After all, EOS 9 was tiny, practically invisible compared to the sprawling mega-colonies scattered across the galaxy. Surely the Krylith wouldn't waste their time on such a minor target. But deep down, he knew better. If they came, the colony wouldn't stand a chance. Taking a deep breath, Daniel recorded the message and saved it to the main database. Then he stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the domes glowed faintly under the dim light of EOS 9's sun. Inside those domes were families, friends, neighbors, all depending on him to keep them safe. For the first time in years, Daniel felt truly afraid. The next morning, Daniel called an emergency meeting. Word spread quickly through the colony, and soon nearly everyone had gathered in the central dome. Clara stood near the front of the crowd, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She hadn't slept well the night before. Plagued by uneasy dreams, she couldn't quite remember. Seeing Daniel's expression now made her stomach churn. "I intercepted a transmission last night," Daniel began, his voice steady but grim. "It mentioned Krylith activity in nearby sectors. I don't know how close they are, but we need to assume the worst." A murmur rippled through the room. Some people gasped. Others exchanged worried glances. A few tried to laugh it off, saying the Krylith wouldn't bother with such a small place. But Daniel shook his head firmly. "We can't afford to take chances," he said. "If they find us, they'll attack, and we're not equipped to defend ourselves." Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding. "What do you suggest we do?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. "We evacuate," he replied finally. But, Clara prompted. "We don't have enough ships," Daniel admitted. "Or fuel. Even if we could leave, we'd only get a fraction of the population out safely." The reality of their situation hit the room like a wave. Panic bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. Clara looked around at the faces of her fellow colonists, young and old, strong and frail, and felt a surge of determination. No matter how hopeless things seemed, giving up wasn't an option. "There has to be another way," she said firmly. "We've survived worse than this before. We'll figure something out." Her words sparked a flicker of hope in the crowd. Slowly, ideas began to emerge. Someone suggested fortifying the domes. Another proposed using mining equipment as makeshift weapons. Each suggestion was met with nods and murmurs of agreement. The colonists weren't soldiers, but they were resourceful. If they had to fight, they would do so with whatever tools they had. As the meeting continued, Daniel noticed a man standing near the back of the room. Ryan Carter. He was older, with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. Ryan had once been a pilot, serving in Earth's fleet during the early days of interstellar exploration. These days he kept mostly to himself, repairing old shuttles in his spare time. Daniel hadn't expected him to show up, let alone speak. "I'll help," Ryan said, suddenly, his voice cutting through the noise. "I may not be young anymore, but I still know how to fly, and I know how to fight." His offer silenced the room. For a moment no one spoke. Then, one by one, the colonists began to nod. Hope wasn't much, but it was enough to start with. That night, as the colony prepared for the unknown, Daniel, Clara, and Ryan met in the control room to plan their strategy. The odds were against them, but they refused to give up. Together they pored over maps, schematics, and inventories, searching for anything that could give them an edge. It was going to be a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, the people of EOS 9 felt united. The days following the emergency meeting passed in a blur of activity. The colony buzzed with an energy it hadn't felt in years. Everyone had a role to play, no matter how small. Some worked on reinforcing the domes, welding extra layers of metal onto the walls to make them sturdier. Others gathered tools and scraps, turning them into crude weapons, spears made from metal rods, slingshots crafted from elastic bands, and even sharpened farming implements. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Clara spent most of her time in the control room with Daniel and Ryan. She didn't know much about combat or strategy, but she knew technology. Her hands moved quickly over the keyboards, running diagnostics on the colony's systems. The orbital cannon, a relic from the early days of EOS 9, was their only real weapon. It hadn't been fired in over a decade, and Clara wasn't sure it would even work. Still, she refused to give up. Every day she ran tests, adjusted settings, and recalibrated sensors. If they were going to stand a chance, that cannon had to be operational. Daniel focused on practical matters. He led teams of colonists in setting traps around the perimeter of the settlement. Using old mining charges and scrap metal, they created explosive devices designed to slow down any attackers. He also worked tirelessly to repair the colony's aging drones. These machines had originally been used for mining operations, but Daniel believed they could be repurposed as decoys or maybe even weapons. It was a long shot, but every advantage counted. Ryan, meanwhile, took charge of organizing the colonists who volunteered to fight. Most of them had never held a weapon before, let alone faced an alien invasion, but Ryan had a way of making people feel capable. His calm demeanor and steady voice inspired confidence. He taught them basic tactics, how to take cover, how to aim, and when to retreat. He reminded them that bravery wasn't about being fearless. It was about standing your ground even when you were scared. Despite the flurry of preparation, fear lingered in the air like a shadow. At night, when the work stopped and the colony fell silent, people whispered about what might happen. What if the Krylith came? What if their defenses failed? What if Earth never sent help? No one voiced these questions aloud during the day, but everyone thought them. The uncertainty weighed heavily on everyone's minds. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara found herself sitting alone in the fields. The crops swayed gently in the artificial breeze generated by the dome's ventilation system. She stared at the rows of greenery, wondering if this would be the last time she saw them. Her experiments, her dreams, all of it might vanish in a single attack. The thought made her chest tighten. "Hey," a voice said softly behind her. Clara turned to see Daniel approaching. He carried a toolbox in one hand and looked exhausted, but his expression softened when he noticed her sitting there. "You okay?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Clara hesitated before nodding. "I guess so, just thinking." "About what?" "The plants," she admitted. "What we're fighting for. If we lose this place, everything I've worked on will be gone. All those years of trying to make something better." Daniel nodded slowly. "I get it. This colony isn't just a home, it's a dream. For all of us. That's why we can't let it go without a fight." "But what if it's not enough?" Clara asked quietly. "What if none of this works?" Daniel sighed and leaned back, staring up at the simulated stars projected onto the dome's ceiling. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Right now, all we can do is try. We've survived out here for this long because we don't give up, and we're not starting now." His words comforted her, though only slightly. They sat in silence, for a while, listening to the hum of the life support systems and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Eventually, Daniel stood up and offered her a hand. "Come on," he said. "Let's check on the cannon again. Maybe we missed something." Clara smiled faintly and took his hand. Together they walked back toward the control room. As the days turned into a week, the sense of urgency grew. The colonists worked around the clock, fueled by adrenaline and determination. Even children helped where they could, carrying supplies or keeping watch near the perimeter. Everyone understood the stakes. If the Krylith came, failure meant death, not just for themselves, but for the future of humanity on EOS 9. Then late one night, the warning came. It started with a low rumble, barely noticeable at first. People paused mid-task, glancing at each other in confusion. Was it a storm? An earthquake? Before anyone could figure it out, the rumble grew louder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Alarms blared throughout the colony, piercing the quiet night. "They're here!" someone shouted. Panic erupted. Colonists scrambled to their assigned positions, grabbing whatever weapons they'd prepared. Clara rushed to the control room, her heart pounding wildly. She slid into her chair and immediately began scanning the sensors. Sure enough, 3 massive ships loomed on the horizon, descending through the atmosphere like predators circling prey. Smaller vessels detached from the motherships heading straight for the colony. "We need to activate the traps," Daniel yelled, already sprinting toward the perimeter. Clara nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She triggered the explosives planted along the outer edges of the settlement. The resulting blasts lit up the night sky, sending shock waves rippling through the air. Several Krylith ships veered off course, caught in the chaos. Cheers erupted from the colonists. But Clara knew it was only a temporary victory. The real battle was just beginning. Ryan stood atop one of the domes, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He watched as the Krylith regrouped, their movements precise and coordinated. They weren't disoriented. They were assessing the situation. Ryan clenched his jaw. These aliens weren't just ruthless, they were smart. Underestimating them would be a fatal mistake. "Everyone, listen up," he shouted into the comm system. "Stay sharp. They're coming in hard." Back in the control room, Clara focused on the orbital cannon. She'd managed to get it online earlier that day, but firing it required perfect timing and nerves of steel. As the Krylith ships drew closer, she steadied her breathing and locked onto a target. One of the larger vessels hovered directly above the colony, its underside bristling with weapons. "This is it," she muttered to herself. "Please work." Her finger hovered over the trigger. Then, with a deep breath, she pressed it. A blinding beam of energy shot out from the cannon, slicing through the darkness like lightning. It struck the Krylith ship dead center, causing a massive explosion that lit up the entire sky. Debris rained down, and the ship plummeted to the ground in flames. For a moment, the colony erupted in cheers. They'd done it. They'd taken down one of the enemy's biggest ships. But the celebration was short-lived. The remaining Krylith forces responded with overwhelming force. Lasers streaked through the air, striking the domes and setting off secondary explosions. Smoke filled the sky, obscuring visibility. The colonists ducked for cover, returning fire with their makeshift weapons. It was chaos. Through the haze, Daniel spotted a group of Krylith troops landing near the eastern dome. He grabbed a nearby drone controller and directed several repurposed mining drones toward the invaders. The machines whirred to life, charging forward like mechanical beasts. Though outnumbered, the drones managed to distract the Krylith long enough for Daniel to launch another round of explosives. Meanwhile, Ryan led a team of volunteers in a desperate counterattack. Armed with nothing more than rifles and courage, they fought fiercely, holding their ground against waves of enemy soldiers. Ryan moved with precision, picking off targets with deadly accuracy. Sweat dripped down his face, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Despite their efforts, the colonists were losing ground. The Krylith were relentless, pushing deeper into the settlement with every passing second. Clara watched from the control room, tears streaming down her face as she realized they might not survive. But then, inspiration struck. "We need to disrupt their communication," she exclaimed to Daniel, who had just burst into the room. "They're too organized. It's like they're controlled by a central hub. If we can hack into their network and shut it down." Daniel nodded immediately. "Do it. I'll cover you." Clara dove back into the mainframe, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She uploaded a virus she'd been working on, a piece of code designed to infiltrate alien systems. It was risky, but it was their only hope. As the program ran, she prayed it would work. Outside, the battle raged on. The colonists fought valiantly, refusing to surrender despite the odds. They were battered and bruised, but they weren't broken. Not yet. Finally, Clara's screen flashed green. "It's done!" she cried. "The virus is in their system!" Almost. Instantly, the tide began to turn. The Krylith faltered, their movements becoming erratic. Ships drifted aimlessly, their crews unable to coordinate. Ground troops hesitated, confused and disoriented. Sensing weakness, Ryan rallied his team for one final push. With renewed determination, the colonists surged forward, driving the Krylith back. Explosions rocked the battlefield as the invaders' ships exploded in rapid succession. Within minutes, the once mighty fleet was in shambles. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack ended. The remaining Krylith ships retreated, disappearing into the night sky. Silence fell over the colony, broken only by the sound of distant fires. The colony of EOS 9 was quiet now, but the silence felt heavy. The battle had ended just hours ago, and the survivors were still trying to process what had happened. The Krylith had come, attacked, and been driven away. A feat no one thought possible. Yet victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like survival. Daniel stood near the edge of the eastern dome, staring out at the wreckage scattered across the barren landscape. Pieces of alien ships lay smoldering in the distance, their metal frames twisted and blackened from the explosions. Closer to the colony, the ground was pockmarked with craters from blasts both human-made and alien-fired. The air smelled of smoke and burned metal, a constant reminder of how close they had come to destruction. He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. His body ached from exhaustion, but his mind wouldn't let him rest. There was too much to do, too many repairs, too many injuries to tend to, too many questions that needed answers. How had they managed to win? Would the Krylith come back? What would happen next? Clara approached him silently, her boots crunching softly against the gravel. She carried a clipboard in one hand, though it was clear she hadn't written anything on it recently. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. Like everyone else, she hadn't slept since the attack began. "You should sit down," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've been running around nonstop for days." Daniel shook his head. "No time for that. We need to get the domes patched up before nightfall. If another storm hits while we're exposed—" "I know," Clara interrupted, her voice firm but kind. "But you'll collapse if you don't take a break. You can't fix everything by yourself." For a moment, Daniel considered arguing, but he knew she was right. He nodded reluctantly and followed her back toward the control room. Along the way, they passed groups of colonists working tirelessly to clean up the damage. Some hauled debris away, while others welded cracks in the dome walls or tended to the injured. Everyone moved with purpose, their faces grim but determined. Inside the control room, Ryan sat slumped in a chair, his head resting against the wall. His rifle lay on the floor beside him, its barrel scorched from repeated firing. He looked up as Daniel and Clara entered, offering them a weak smile. "We did good," he said, his voice raspy. "Didn't think we'd pull it off, but we did." Clara smiled faintly. "Yeah, we did, but we're not out of the woods yet. This place is falling apart." Ryan chuckled dryly. "Tell me something I don't know." Despite the humor in his tone, there was no mistaking the weariness in his expression. None of them had escaped unscathed. Ryan's arms were covered in burns from deflecting enemy fire, and Daniel's hands were raw from handling hot welding tools without gloves. Even Clara bore signs of the battle, a cut above her eyebrow and dirt smeared across her cheeks. As the three of them sat together, the weight of what they had accomplished and what they still faced settled over them. They had survived the Krylith, but the cost had been high. Several colonists had lost their lives during the fight, including a young boy named Ethan, who had volunteered to help carry supplies. His death hit the community hard, reminding everyone of the fragility of life on EOS 9. "We need to honor them," Clara said, suddenly breaking the silence. "The people who didn't make it. We owe them that." Daniel nodded slowly. "We will. Tomorrow morning. Right now, we focus on staying alive." The conversation shifted to practical matters. They discussed priorities: fixing the life support systems, repairing the damaged crops inside the domes, and ensuring the orbital cannon remained operational in case the Krylith returned. Each task seemed monumental, but they tackled them one step at a time. Later that evening, Daniel walked through the colony, checking on the progress of various repair efforts. Everywhere he went, he saw resilience. People worked together seamlessly, supporting each other despite their own pain and exhaustion. A group of farmers had salvaged seeds from the ruined fields and were already planting new ones. Engineers rigged temporary patches for leaking pipes using scraps of metal and duct tape. Even the children pitched in, fetching tools or carrying messages between teams. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. For now. When Daniel reached the medical bay, He found it bustling with activity. Volunteers with minimal training stitched wounds, applied bandages, and distributed painkillers. The colony's doctor, an older woman named Margaret, supervised everything with calm efficiency. Despite the chaos, she managed to keep a sense of order. "How are we holding up?" Daniel asked as he stepped inside. Margaret glanced up, her glasses perched precariously on the tip of her nose. "Better than expected, considering. Most of the injuries aren't life-threatening. A few broken bones, some burns, but nothing we can't handle." "That's good news," Daniel replied, though his relief was tempered by the knowledge that they lacked proper medical supplies. If anyone developed complications, they might not be able to save them. As he left the medical bay, Daniel noticed a young woman sitting alone on a bench outside. Her name was Lisa, and she had been one of the first to volunteer when the fighting started. Now she stared blankly at the ground, her hands trembling slightly. "Hey," Daniel said, sitting down beside her. "How are you holding up?" Lisa hesitated before answering. I don't know. I keep thinking about what happened, about the people we lost. I don't understand why they chose us. Why would the Krylith even care about this place?" Daniel sighed. "They don't see us as people. To them, we're just resources to exploit or obstacles to remove. That's why we have to stay strong. We proved today that we won't go down without a fight." Lisa nodded slowly, though her expression remained troubled. "Do you think they'll come back?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, "but if they do, we'll be ready." That night, as the colony settled into an uneasy quiet, Clara sat alone in the control room, staring at the screens displaying data from the orbital cannon. The weapon had saved them once, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be enough next time. The Krylith were powerful, and their retreat felt less like defeat and more like regrouping. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. Sleep tugged at her consciousness, but she resisted. There was still so much to do, so much to plan for. She opened her eyes again and turned her attention to the colony's communication array. Earth needed to know what had happened here, not just to warn them about the Krylith, but to remind them that EOS 9 mattered. Clara typed out a message, detailing the attack and the colony's miraculous defense. She included requests for reinforcements, supplies, and recognition. When she finished, she hesitated, her finger hovering over the send button. Would anyone listen? Or would they dismiss her plea as insignificant, just like they always had? Before she could decide, the door to the control room opened and Ryan stepped inside. He carried 2 cups of water, offering one to Clara. "You look like you need this," he said, handing her the cup. Clara accepted it gratefully, taking a sip before speaking. "Thanks, I was just thinking about Earth, about whether they'll care what happened here." "They'll care," Ryan said firmly. "If they don't, then they're fools. What you all did today, that's not something you forget." Clara smiled faintly. "I hope you're right." Ryan sat down beside her, glancing at the screens. "You really think they'll come back?" Clara nodded. "Yeah, and when they do, we'll need to be stronger than ever, smarter, faster. We got lucky this time, but luck doesn't last forever." Ryan studied her for a moment, impressed by her determination. "Then we'll make our own luck. Whatever it takes." Clara met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "Whatever it takes." The next morning, the colony gathered near the Eastern Dome for a memorial service. Ethan's mother spoke briefly, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. She thanked everyone for their bravery and reminded them that her son had died protecting their home. By the end of her speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Afterward, Daniel addressed the group. "We've been through hell," he said, his voice echoing across the open space. "But we're still standing. And as long as we stand together, we'll never fall." The colonists cheered, their voices rising in unison. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, they shared a renewed sense of purpose. EOS 9 wasn't just a colony anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, proof that even the weakest among them could rise to meet any challenge. The days following the memorial service passed in a haze of hard work and quiet reflection. The colonists of EOS 9 were determined to rebuild, but the weight of their recent victory and loss hung over them like a storm cloud. Everyone pitched in doing what they could to restore some sense of normalcy. The domes were patched up, the crops replanted, and the damaged machinery repaired as best as possible. Yet beneath the surface, there was an unspoken tension. They had survived one attack, but no one believed it would be their last. Daniel spent most of his time overseeing repairs, moving from one project to the next with relentless energy. He rarely stopped to rest, driven by a need to keep busy. If he slowed down even for a moment, the memories of the battle came rushing back. The explosions, the screams, the faces of those who hadn't made it. Work was his escape, a way to push aside the grief and focus on something tangible. Clara, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about the future. She spent hours in the control room, studying the data from the orbital cannon and analyzing the virus she'd used to disrupt the Krylith's communication system. It had worked once, but she knew they couldn't rely on the same trick again. The Krylith were smart. If they returned, they would adapt. Clara's mind raced with ideas for new defenses, but every solution seemed to lead to more questions. What if the virus failed? What if the cannon malfunctioned? What if the colony simply wasn't strong enough? Ryan tried to stay optimistic, though it wasn't easy. He organized daily drills to prepare the colonists for another attack. Using makeshift weapons and repurposed drones, they practiced tactics designed to maximize their limited resources. Ryan pushed them hard, knowing that hesitation in battle could mean death. But he also made sure to praise their efforts, reminding them how far they'd come since the first warning arrived. "You're getting better," he told a group of volunteers after one particularly grueling session. "Keep this up and you'll give the Krylith something to think about." The colonists nodded, sweat dripping from their brows but determination in their eyes. They weren't soldiers, but they were learning quickly. Each drill brought them closer to becoming a cohesive unit, capable of defending their home against whatever came next. Despite these preparations, fear lingered in the air. At night, when the work stopped and the colony fell silent, people whispered about the unknown. Would the Krylith return? How much time did they have? Some suggested sending out scouts to monitor nearby sectors, while others argued that venturing outside the colony would only put lives at risk. The uncertainty gnawed at everyone, making sleep elusive and dreams restless. One evening, Clara found herself sitting alone in the fields inside the dome. The new crops were beginning to sprout, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil. She stared at them, marveling at their resilience. Even in such harsh conditions, life found a way to grow. It gave her hope, but not enough to silence the doubts swirling in her mind. "Still here?" a voice asked behind her. Clara turned to see Daniel approaching. He carried a toolbox under one arm and looked as exhausted as ever. His face was streaked with dirt, and his clothes smelled faintly of smoke. Despite his weariness, his expression softened when he noticed her sitting there. "Yeah," Clara replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Just thinking." "About what?" Daniel asked, sitting down beside her. "The plants," she said, gesturing toward the rows of young crops. "They remind me of us. Fragile, but stubborn. We've been knocked down so many times, but we keep coming back." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's true, but plants don't have enemies hunting them." Clara sighed, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I know. That's why I can't stop thinking about what happens next. The Krylith aren't going to forget about us. When they come back, we need to be ready." "We will be," Daniel said firmly. "We've got the cannon, the traps, the drones, and we've got Ryan teaching everyone how to fight. We're stronger than we were before." "But is it enough?" Clara asked quietly. "What if they bring more ships, more troops? What if they figure out how to counter our defenses?" Daniel hesitated, unsure how to answer. He wanted to reassure her, but he couldn't deny the truth. Their victory had been a miracle, not a guarantee. Still, he forced a smile and placed a hand on her shoulder. "All we can do is prepare." he said, "and trust that we'll find a way to survive, just like we always have." Clara nodded, though her expression remained troubled. She appreciated Daniel's optimism, but deep down she knew they needed more than hope. They needed a plan, a real one. Later that night, Clara returned to the control room. The screens displayed maps of the surrounding area, sensor readings and schematics of the colony's defenses. She studied them intently, searching for weaknesses. The orbital cannon was their strongest asset, but it required precise targeting and timing. If the Krylith attacked from multiple angles, they might not be able to defend themselves effectively. Her thoughts drifted to the mining drones. During the last battle, Daniel had used them to distract the enemy, buying valuable time for the colonists to regroup. Could they do more? Could the drones be modified to carry explosives or act as decoys on a larger scale? The idea sparked a flicker of excitement in her chest. She pulled up the drone schematics and began sketching modifications. Adding remote detonation systems would allow them to transform the drones into mobile bombs. Equipping them with reflective surfaces could make them harder to detect, giving them an edge in stealth operations. It was risky, but it might just work. As she worked, Ryan entered the room. He carried a clipboard and looked surprised to see her still awake. "Shouldn't you be resting?" he asked, setting the clipboard down on the desk. "I could ask you the same thing," Clara replied with a small smile. Ryan chuckled. "Fair point. But seriously, you've been working non-stop. You're going to burn yourself out." "I'm fine," Clara insisted, though her bloodshot eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "I was just thinking about ways to improve our defenses, specifically the drones." Ryan leaned over her shoulder, examining the sketches on the screen. "Not bad," he said after a moment. "But modifying them won't be easy. We'll need parts we don't have." "We'll improvise," Clara said, her voice firm. "We always do." Ryan nodded, impressed by her determination. "All right, let's run it by Daniel tomorrow. If anyone can make it happen, it's him." The next morning, the three of them met in the control room to discuss Clara's plan. Daniel listened intently as she explained her ideas, nodding occasionally as she outlined the modifications. When she finished, he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It's risky," he said finally, "but it could work. The question is, do we have the materials?" Ryan flipped through the inventory list on his clipboard. "We've got some spare circuits and wiring from the old shuttles. Not enough for all the drones, but maybe enough for a few." "That's a start," Clara said. "We'll prioritize the ones closest to the perimeter. If we can slow the Krylith down early, it'll give us a better chance." Daniel agreed, and they spent the rest of the day gathering supplies and testing prototypes. By evening, they had successfully modified 2 drones, outfitting them with explosive charges and reflective panels. The results were promising, though far from perfect. As they worked, word spread throughout the colony about the new project. Volunteers showed up to help, eager to contribute in any way they could. Some assisted with the modifications, while others tested the drones in simulated scenarios. The atmosphere was tense but focused, each person aware of the stakes. By the end of the week, they had a small fleet of modified drones ready for deployment. Though it wasn't much compared to the Krylith's firepower, it gave the colonists a renewed sense of confidence. For the first time since the attack, they felt like they were taking control of their fate instead of waiting for disaster to strike. That night, as the colony settled into an uneasy quiet, Clara stood near the edge of the eastern dome, staring out at the horizon. The stars twinkled faintly in the distance, their light barely visible through the haze of smoke lingering in the air. She wondered what lay beyond the darkness, whether the Krylith were watching, planning their next move. Behind her, Daniel joined her silently. He didn't say anything at first, simply standing beside her as they gazed out at the vast expanse of space. After a while, he spoke. "We've done everything we can," he said softly. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." Clara nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for the people around her. They weren't soldiers or heroes. They were farmers, scientists, and engineers. But they had proven that strength wasn't measured by power or numbers. It was measured by resilience, by unity, by the refusal to give up. The weeks that followed were a mix of tension and routine. Life on EOS 9 had settled into a fragile rhythm, where the colonists balanced rebuilding their home with preparing for another attack. Every morning began with patrols around the perimeter, checking traps and ensuring the modified drones were operational. Inside the domes, work continued on repairing damaged infrastructure, replanting crops, and caring for the injured. The colony was healing, but slowly. Daniel spent his days overseeing repairs and testing new defensive systems. He worked tirelessly, pushing himself to the limit and often ignoring the protests of those around him. Clara frequently reminded him to rest, but he waved her off, muttering something about needing to stay focused. In truth, Daniel didn't know how to stop. If he paused for even a moment, the weight of responsibility threatened to crush him. So he kept moving, kept fixing, kept planning. Clara, meanwhile, poured all her energy into improving their defenses. She spent hours in the control room, fine-tuning the orbital cannon and refining the virus she'd used against the Krylith. Though it had succeeded once, she knew they couldn't rely on the same strategy twice. The Krylith were intelligent. If they returned, they would adapt. Clara's mind raced with ideas, ways to enhance the virus, methods to disrupt alien technology more effectively, and plans to integrate the colony's systems into a unified defense network. Her hands moved quickly over the keyboards, lines of code appearing on the screens as she worked late into the night. Ryan took charge of training the colonists, turning them from frightened civilians into capable fighters. He drilled them daily, teaching them tactics and strategies designed to maximize their limited resources. At first, many struggled with the exercises, unused to handling weapons or thinking strategically. But Ryan was patient, encouraging them to learn from their mistakes and build confidence. Over time, they improved, becoming more coordinated and disciplined. Even those who had never held a weapon before began to feel a sense of competence, knowing they could contribute to the colony's survival. Despite these efforts, fear lingered in the air. The colonists tried to go about their lives as normally as possible, but the shadow of the Krylith loomed large. Conversations often turned to speculation about when, or if, the aliens would return. Some believed the enemy was regrouping, gathering reinforcements before launching another assault. Others hoped the Krylith had decided EOS 9 wasn't worth the trouble. No one knew for sure, and the uncertainty gnawed at everyone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara found herself sitting alone in the fields inside the dome. The young crops swayed gently in the artificial breeze, their leaves rustling softly. She stared at them, marveling at their resilience. Despite the harsh conditions and recent destruction, they continued to grow, reaching toward the simulated sunlight above. It gave her hope, but not enough to silence the doubts swirling in her mind. "Still here?" a voice asked behind her. Clara turned to see Ryan approaching. He carried a clipboard under one arm and looked surprised to see her still awake. His face was streaked with dirt, and his clothes smelled faintly of smoke. Despite his weariness, his expression softened when he noticed her sitting there. "Yeah," Clara replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Just thinking." "About what?" Ryan asked, sitting down beside her. "The plants," she said, gesturing toward the rows of young crops. "They remind me of us, fragile but stubborn. We've been knocked down so many times, but we keep coming back." Ryan nodded slowly. "That's true, but plants don't have enemies hunting them." Clara sighed, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I know. That's why I can't stop thinking about what happens next. The Krylith aren't going to forget about us. When they come back, we need to be ready." "We will be," Ryan said firmly. "We've got the cannon, the traps, the drones, and we've got you figuring out how to make everything work better. We're stronger than we were before." "But is it enough?" Clara asked quietly. "What if they bring more ships, more troops? What if they figure out how to counter our defenses?" Ryan hesitated, unsure how to answer. He wanted to reassure her, but he couldn't deny the truth. Their victory had been a miracle, not a guarantee. Still, he forced a smile and placed a hand on her shoulder. "All we can do is prepare," he said. and trust that we'll find a way to survive, just like we always have. Clara nodded, though her expression remained troubled. She appreciated Ryan's optimism, but deep down, she knew they needed more than hope. They needed a plan, a real one. Later that night, Clara returned to the control room. The screens displayed maps of the surrounding area, sensor readings, and schematics of the colony's defenses. She studied them intently, searching for weaknesses. The orbital cannon was their strongest asset, but it required precise targeting and timing. If the Krylith attacked from multiple angles, they might not be able to defend themselves effectively. Her thoughts drifted to the mining drones. During the last battle, Daniel had used them to distract the enemy, buying valuable time for the colonists to regroup. Could they do more? Could the drones be modified to carry explosives or act as decoys on a larger scale? The idea sparked a flicker of excitement in her chest. She pulled up the drone schematics and began sketching modifications. Adding remote detonation systems would allow them to transform the drones into mobile bombs. Equipping them with reflective surfaces could make them harder to detect, giving them an edge in stealth operations. It was risky, but it might just work. As she worked, Daniel entered the room. He carried a toolbox under one arm and looked surprised to see her still awake. "Shouldn't you be resting?" he asked, setting the toolbox down on the desk. "I could ask you the same thing," Clara replied with a small smile. Daniel chuckled. "Fair point. But seriously, you've been working nonstop. You're going to burn yourself out." "I'm fine," Clara insisted, though her bloodshot eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "I was just thinking about ways to improve our defenses. Specifically, the drones." Daniel leaned over her shoulder, examining the sketches on the screen. "Not bad," he said after a moment, "but modifying them won't be easy. We'll need parts we don't have." "We'll improvise," Clara said, her voice firm. "We always do." Daniel nodded, impressed by her determination. "All right, let's run it by Ryan tomorrow. If anyone can make it happen, it's him." The next morning, the three of them met in the control room to discuss Clara's plan. Daniel listened intently as she explained her ideas, nodding occasionally as she outlined the modifications. When she finished, he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It's risky," he said finally, "but it could work. The question is, do we have the materials?" Ryan flipped through the inventory list on his clipboard. "We've got some spare circuits and wiring from the old shuttles. Not enough for all the drones, but maybe enough for a few. That's a start," Clara said. "We'll prioritize the ones closest to the perimeter. If we can slow the Krylith down early, it'll give us a better chance." Daniel agreed, and they spent the rest of the day gathering supplies and testing prototypes. By evening, they had successfully modified 2 drones, outfitting them with explosive charges and reflective panels. The results were promising, though far from perfect. As they worked, word spread throughout the colony about the new project. Volunteers showed up to help, eager to contribute in any way they could. Some assisted with the modifications while others tested the drones in simulated scenarios. The atmosphere was tense but focused, each person aware of the stakes. By the end of the week, they had a small fleet of modified drones ready for deployment. Though it wasn't much compared to the Krylith's firepower, it gave the colonists a renewed sense of confidence. For the first time since the attack, they felt like they were taking control of their fate, instead of waiting for disaster to strike. That night, as the colony settled into an uneasy quiet, Clara stood near the edge of the eastern dome, staring out at the horizon. The stars twinkled faintly in the distance, their light barely visible through the haze of smoke lingering in the air. She wondered what lay beyond the darkness, whether the Krylith were watching, planning their next move. Behind her, Daniel joined her silently. He didn't say anything at first, simply standing beside her as they gazed out at the vast expanse of space. After a while, he spoke. "We've done everything we can," he said softly. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." Clara nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for the people around her. They weren't soldiers or heroes. They were farmers, scientists, and engineers. But they had proven that strength wasn't measured by power or numbers. It was measured by resilience, by unity, by the refusal to give up. And as long as they stood together, they would never truly be defeated. Unbeknownst to the colonists, their preparations were being watched. Far beyond the reaches of EOS 9's sensors, a lone Krylith scout ship hovered in the void of space. Its crew analyzed data collected during the previous attack, studying the humans' tactics and identifying weaknesses. The report would soon reach the main fleet, along with orders to launch a second assault, one far more devastating than the first. For now, however, the colony remained unaware. The colonists continued their work, strengthening their defenses and honing their skills. They knew the Krylith might return, but they also knew they had faced impossible odds before, and won. The Krylith returned on a cold, dark night. There was no warning this time, no rumble in the distance or flicker of movement on the sensors. One moment, the colony was quiet, its inhabitants resting after another long day of preparation. The next, the sky lit up with streaks of fire as alien ships descended through the atmosphere, their sleek forms cutting through the air like knives. Clara was in the control room when the first alarms blared. She had been running diagnostics on the orbital cannon, making sure it was ready for anything. Her heart leapt into her throat as red warning lights flashed across the screens. Without hesitation, she activated the colony-wide alert system. Here, she shouted into the comlink, her voice trembling but clear. Everyone to your positions. The colony sprang into action. People scrambled out of their beds and into the roles they had practiced countless times. Daniel raced to the perimeter, ensuring the traps were armed and ready. Ryan climbed atop one of the domes, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon for signs of enemy movement. The modified drones hummed to life, hovering near the edges of the settlement, waiting for commands. Outside, the Krylith fleet loomed ominously. This time there were more ships, larger ones, and they moved with precision, surrounding the colony from all sides. Smaller attack craft detached from the motherships, speeding toward the ground like predators closing in on prey. The colonists braced themselves, knowing this battle would be far harder than the last. Clara's fingers flew over the keyboard as she locked onto the nearest target, a massive warship hovering directly above the eastern dome. She hesitated for a split second, then pressed the trigger. The orbital cannon roared to life, firing a beam of energy that sliced through the darkness. It struck the ship dead center, causing an explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through the air. Debris rained down, and the vessel began to plummet. Cheers erupted briefly among the colonists, but Clara didn't have time to celebrate. Another ship had already taken its place, unleashing a barrage of lasers that struck the dome walls with devastating force. Cracks spiderwebbed across the reinforced metal, threatening to collapse under the pressure. "Daniel," Clara yelled into the comlink. "The eastern dome is taking heavy fire." "I'm on it," Daniel replied, his voice strained. He directed a team of volunteers to reinforce the damaged section with spare panels while simultaneously triggering several explosive charges along the perimeter. The resulting blast created a smokescreen, obscuring the colony from view and buying precious seconds to regroup. Ryan used the chaos to his advantage. He guided the modified drones toward the advancing Krylith troops, ordering them to detonate their payloads at strategic points. Explosions erupted in quick succession, throwing the enemy off balance. Though outnumbered, the drones managed to hold their own, forcing the Krylith to divert attention away from the main settlement. Inside the control room, Clara monitored the situation closely. Her eyes darted between the screens, tracking enemy movements and adjusting the orbital cannon's targeting systems. She fired again and again, each shot striking true, but the Krylith kept coming. Their sheer numbers overwhelmed the colony's defenses, and it became clear that brute force alone wouldn't win this fight. "We need to disrupt their communication," Clara muttered to herself, recalling the virus she had developed months earlier. She opened a secure channel to Daniel and Ryan. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "I'm uploading the virus again. If I can infiltrate their network, I might be able to shut them down." "Do it," Daniel replied immediately. We'll cover you. Clara nodded, her fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. She launched the program, watching as lines of code spread outward, searching for a connection to the Krylith's central hub. Time seemed to slow as the virus worked its way through layers of alien encryption. Seconds felt like hours, and every laser blast or explosion outside reminded her how close they were to failure. Finally, the screen flashed green. "It's in!" Clara cried, relief flooding her voice. Their system should start failing any second now. Almost instantly, the tide began to turn. The Krylith faltered, their movements becoming erratic. Ships drifted aimlessly, unable to coordinate attacks. Ground troops hesitated, confused and disoriented. Sensing weakness, Ryan rallied his team for one final push. "Now's our chance," he shouted into the comm link. "Hit them hard!" The colonists surged forward, pouring everything they had into the counterattack. Farmers armed with makeshift spears charged alongside engineers wielding repurposed tools. Drones zipped through the air, targeting enemy vessels with relentless precision. Even children helped, carrying supplies or relaying messages between teams. The Krylith fought back fiercely, but their lack of coordination made them vulnerable. One by one, their ships exploded in bursts of light, raining debris onto the barren landscape below. The ground troops retreated, scrambling back to their remaining vessels in a desperate attempt to escape. As the last Krylith ship lifted off and disappeared into the night sky, an eerie silence fell over the colony. For a moment, no one spoke. Exhausted and battered, the survivors simply stared at each other, covered in dirt and blood, unable to believe what had just happened. They had faced the impossible and triumphed. Daniel entered the control room, his face pale but triumphant. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse. "We actually did it." Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yeah," she whispered. "We did." Outside, Ryan raised a fist in the air, signaling victory. The colonists cheered, their voices echoing across the ruined landscape. They had faced the strongest foe imaginable, and won. In the days that followed, the colony began the long process of recovery. The damage was extensive, but spirits were high. Everyone knew they had achieved something extraordinary. News of their victory eventually reached Earth, where the story of EOS 9 became legendary. What had once been dismissed as humanity's weakest outpost was now celebrated as a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. Reinforcements arrived weeks later, bringing much-needed supplies and support. Earth Command promised to fortify the colony, ensuring it would never be vulnerable again. But for Daniel, Clara, and Ryan, the real reward was seeing their community come together in the face of overwhelming odds. As they stood together near the edge of the eastern dome, gazing out at the repaired fields and rebuilt structures, Clara smiled faintly. "We're stronger than we thought," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "And we proved it. To ourselves and to everyone else." Ryan grinned, clapping both of them on the shoulder. "Here's to surviving the impossible." They shared a laugh, the sound mingling with the gentle hum of machinery and the rustle of leaves in the artificial breeze. Life on EOS 9 wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was theirs, and they had fought too hard to let it go. Somewhere in the vastness of space, the Krylith remembered the name EOS 9, not as a target, but as a warning.